Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for those of you who came in person to brave the cold and those of you who decided not to brave the cold. We also respect that choice, and we're glad to see you on Zoom. My name is Molly Barnard. I am the Assistant Director of Faculty and Staff Development for the College of Agriculture, working with the Office of Multicultural Programs, and also the chair of the Planning Committee for this week, celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and contributions to America and to the world. I am a pacer, and so I think I'm just going to do our introduction with you seeing my piece of paper today. But I'm so excited to have everybody here. I'm very excited for everything that's going on today. So Professor Sonia Gipson Rankin is a distinguished legal scholar who combines her computer science expertise with her commitment to legal justice. Her work focuses on innovation, particularly at the intersection of technology, family law, and legal education. She earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Illinois College of Law and graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from Morgan State University. As a professor of law at the University of New Mexico School of Law, she teaches, and this is a long list, torts, family law, technology and law, race and law, assisted reproductive technologies and the law, and cyber torts. Her groundbreaking scholarship on artificial intelligence has appeared in leading publications, including Washington and Lee Law Review, NYU Law Review Online, Wisconsin Law Review, and Nature Review's Electrical Engineering, which I want to learn more about what that is offline. Her work on legal education innovation features in the Connecticut Law Review, Family Law Quarterly, and the Journal of Law and Education. A respected leader in the legal community, Professor Gipson Rankin is an American Bar Foundation Fellow and serves on the New Mexico Supreme Court Commission on Equity and Justice. She's previously served as president of the New Mexico Black Lawyers Association. Her expertise in technology policy shines through her work with the University of New Mexico Santa Fe Institute Interdisciplinary Working Group on Algorithmic Justice, where she advises state and federal officials and nonprofits on AI policy. As co-founder for the University of New Mexico Algorithmic Justice Project, she has emerged as a prominent voice on AI, technology, algorithmic justice, constitutional law, and inclusive leadership. Her legal, political, and tech insights are frequently featured on BBC World News, Reuters, NPR, Yahoo Finance. You can put this in French, so I have to say it in French. Alliance France Presse, podcasts, and local news. Additionally, she delivers lectures on artificial intelligence to judges serving in state, international, and tribal courts, as well as to state bars and industries nationwide. Her mission remains constant: to inspire students, communities, and systems to seek justice with a spirit of excellence and to read comic books. Always very important to have your personal interests. We are also, and I'm gonna call you out. Is that okay if I call you out? We're joined also today by Sonia's father, David Gipson, who is an alum of the computer science department. That's how her parents met, was at Purdue. And this is actually Sonia's first time in West Lafayette. So as we welcome her as a keynote, we also want to welcome her to the Purdue community and to West Lafayette. So I will let you take it away, Sonia.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, come on. I have come all the way from New Mexico. So we'll try it one more again. Good afternoon. I am so glad to see you all here today. Glad for our online community. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I'll talk a little bit, but I'm just so grateful to be here. I just want to start off, please join me in a warm thank you to the College of Agriculture for this work and this week that they have put together. I am just so impressed what the Purdue community has committed to the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in particular, we're so grateful to Dean Dean Engel, to Dr. Morris, to Molly, and to Melissa for all of their work they did to give us this special opportunity to gather today. So I'm glad for that. All right, y'all don't have all day. This is a lunch hour. Somebody skipped class for this, so don't get me in trouble. But let's get into it. I just wanted to, so glad to be here. And when Molly said, I'm sorry for the cold, this is something that one of the meteorologists in New Mexico posted yesterday. Angel Fire is about 3 hours north of me in New Mexico. -30 before the wind chill. So I've come to Indiana to warm up. This feels, I'm like, all right, I'll take it, right? We're going to have a bit of a chat today. Save your questions. We'll have a space for that at the end. For our online colleagues, please feel free to save your questions, put them in the chat, And Molly is so gracious. She's going to be able to share that with all of us. But here's what we're going to chat about today, right, with Dr. King. This idea of artificial intelligence, the moral arc and justice. What is AI and why does AI bias matter? Real world consequences, AI bias in practice. And why does this happen? We'll look into data structures and blind spots, and then balancing innovation with ethical and legal considerations, and mitigating algorithmic bias, some concrete steps. And then we'll end with where we're headed next, right? The road ahead, pulling the arc towards justice. Sound good? I think we'll have a pretty good time. And I just wanted to bring greetings on behalf of my dear colleagues, the UNM SFI Interdisciplinary Working Group on Algorithmic Justice. So we're computer scientists, physicists, social scientists, lawyers, no marketing people. This is the best name we could think of. And we just kind of chat and we try to think and be a resource in particular for federal and local officials to really think intentionally about artificial intelligence, particularly focusing in housing, criminal justice, and just being available to talk about privacy and transparency. And with my dear colleagues, Dr. Melanie Moses and Dr. Kathy Powers, we've created the UNM Algorithmic Justice Project. We really, really like our logo lady. And we want to be a resource in particular for our university. So we go all over the university, in particular, not just talking about artificial intelligence, but what we understand from our different disciplinary backgrounds. I talk with a law focus. Dr. Moses talks from a computer science focus. Dr. Powers talks from an Africana studies and political science expertise. And it helps us get stronger because when we hear each other's disciplinary perspectives, then we can be a better resource altogether. But I'm so glad to be here. Just as you heard, this is where the Gipson family was founded, right here in West Lafayette. So that's my parents at their wedding at my great aunt's house in Indianapolis. My dad took an exam. They took a road trip, got married in Indianapolis and after his last exam. So all of you, look to your left, look to your right. You don't know who's in class with you. Just pay attention. Don't waste a moment, right? But my parents both received their master's in computer science right here from Purdue University. And so I'm very, very glad to be here. And I want you all to kind of always be excited to think about your own trajectory, right? My father went to Southern University in Louisiana. My mother graduated from Hunter College in New York. And from that journey, with just that start, our family in a couple of generations has come to some really exciting opportunities in all kinds of disciplines and spaces. And in particular, I'm now just that fast. We're now 3 generations of computer scientists, right? On the left is a picture of my sister. She's in tech in New Jersey, and that's, if none of y'all know what those machines, that was a 1990s computer. In the bottom, you'll see my dad. Who remembers that old Mac from the 80s? That was the good old day. We were cutting edge. That's a picture of my mother. She was actually in Ghana teaching some students how to use the computers there. That's my son doing some AI coding during COVID. You had to keep him busy. Now, here's the test. What does my son's shirt say? For my binary friends, it says I code. That's how nerdy of a family we are, right? Those are my daughters building a supercomputer for summer fun. That's what we do in our kind of family, right? So we're computer scientists and mathematicians and astrophysicists and this here lawyer. And we're here to talk about the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And what does that tell us about this idea of artificial intelligence, algorithmic justice? How do we take this individual who left us in the 1960s, what does that say to us today in 2025? And I've actually been very blessed. I've been able to go around the country and kind of see his journey. This is Dr. King's home that he was born into in Georgia, and that's the church where he pastored, Ebenezer Baptist Church. Anyone ever been to his birthplace and the church in Georgia? I've also had an opportunity to go up to Boston where he received his doctorate, and there's this beautiful statue in his tribute, and they even have a tribute to where he used to talk on the telephone. I like the corded wire, where he met Coretta Scott King and where they started dating when he was pastoring at 12th Baptist Church up there. And I got to see his dating spot where he met her. And then I've even had an opportunity to go to Memphis, Tennessee. Anybody here been to Memphis to see where he was slain? And thinking about his final resting spot in Atlanta, I encourage you to walk the spaces Dr. King physically walked to get a sense of these ideas. And I've had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and stand in the spot where he delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. That was me looking upon a throng of random people. They did not listen to me, but I did read the speech. I was like, hey, I'm in the spot. I might as well use it. But, to be in that space is something more special than you think. And if you go just across the way, you'll actually get to see the Dr. King tribute that has been created. And they have a Martin Luther King Jr. memorial that is in place there. And there are some famous lines on the walls around that place. Anyone been there? Anyone seen that and had a chance to journey? It is more emotional than you think. That statue, and I'm really liking those sneakers. I've got to go find another pair. I mean, it was really a really special kind of physical space to stand. And on one of the famous quotes they have is where we drew today's lecture. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. What does that mean? Where did Dr. King get this phrase? Well, he earned his PhD from Boston University, and he drew that famous phrase that he would pull from Minister Theodore Parker. Minister Parker was an abolitionist in the 1800s. He was born in Massachusetts, and he would be really an advocate for the ending of slavery and for a way to better see the next version of the United States, this America, what it would become. And Minister Parker said this in a sermon in 1853. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. This is what Minister Parker had written in 1853. Now, y'all were thinking, I don't have to read anything, let alone from the 1900s, let alone 1853. But Dr. King was digging deep, and he unearthed this statement that would resonate with him, and it would be part of the foundation of how he could persevere when things looked complex. I'll leave that, and we'll come to it and think about it a lot over the next part of our time together. But what do you do when things look complex, when it seems bigger than you can handle, when it seems more than you can bear? What do we do? And so we've got this question we're going to kind of query today that I'd like to think about with you. How do we ensure that new technologies, especially artificial intelligence, bend that arc toward justice rather than away from it? How do we as a group do that? How do we individually do that? How do we collectively solve it? Well, I started thinking a little bit when Dr. King would give this quote about the moral arc and then the height of his work. He was living in the 1960s. All right. When I say the phrase 1960s, what comes to mind? Civil rights, the Beatles. What'd you say? Flower power, very cute outfits. Oh, they were figuring out those boots. They had the go-go boots, right? I mean, they knew how to stop. I mean, we were at this very shifting time in the United States, across the world. And even during that time, we were at a really exciting shifting time in the world of technology. The 1960s is actually, for scholars, we're my computer scientists and tech community and engineers, this was the start of what we call our modern artificial intelligence, really got its go in the 1960s. It would be the rise of neural networks. It would be the rise of natural language processing, where they were starting to get this idea that different disciplines, NLP, natural language processing in particular, could feed into the way these computers are thinking. And if we could just get the machines to think more like us, what else could we do? All of this was happening at our top universities and institutions like Purdue during the 1960s. We went over to the math department yesterday, and in the basement, who here has seen the history of the computer science department in the math department basement? You gotta go. It was really, really cool. And they show all the work that was happening right here at Purdue from the 50s and the 60s and every generation, and even the innovations that are still occurring today, right here on your own campus. Dr. King was just like you and I, right? Even though we're aware of all the latest artists, and y'all have been paying attention to that Drake, Kendrick Lamar foolishness and have made your choices, you're still aware of what's happening in tech and what's happening in innovation and what's happening in politics and ways we want things to grow and change. And Dr. King was no different. He was also aware of these innovative things that were happening in technology. And there's this great book I encourage you to read by Dr. Charlton Ilwain. Doc, I had a chance to hear him speak at Duke last year. Phenomenal, phenomenal. But he's got this book called Black Software. And Dr. McIlwain talks about the role of civil rights and technology, and what was the role of Black Americans in particular at the founding of IBM and MIT, and what it looked like and what it meant. And in his work, he outlines what Dr. King thought about the rise of our future algorithmic age. Now, Dr. King didn't use the words of algorithmic justice, but he was well aware that this tech and these computers were going to do a thing. They were going to do a very new thing, and that it was going to be essential that lots of different people be involved. People like A. Philip Randolph, people like Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, people like Bayard Rustin. They were all very actively aware that whatever was happening in those universities and the tech that was being created by the federal government and at our national labs was going to have a real serious impact on the future of us all. That was the work that Dr. King was already looking at, already thinking about, was already aware of. So this idea that these are two separate times and places isn't true, right? These are very connected ideas. So let's get into what we're thinking about, right? What is the idea of artificial intelligence? Why does bias in AI matter? And we'll talk a little bit plainly today, because I believe we're going to have some complex conversations to do what we want to do next. So we have been studying artificial intelligence for years. Please let me know if you see some of your favorite movies up here, favorite shows. What do you got? Wall-E. What did you say? Star Wars. Now listen, I don't want any trouble with you all. There's Star Wars and Star Trek. I didn't want the fight. I didn't want the fight. What else do you see up there? iRobot, AI, that's artificial intelligence. Oh, that almost got me. His mama's dead. He falls, he's got the one strand of hair. Sorry, I don't mean to give away the movie. What else do you see? Terminator, Matrix. Anybody spot RoboCop? Yeah. Sorry, Dave, I can't do that. We got all the classics. Now, I've added a new one for the real diehards. That's Synergy from Gem and the Holograms, a life-changing cartoon from 1985 to 1986. I'm not saying I may have fallen in love with that show. I'm just saying this was artificial intelligence, and they changed their outfits 3 times per episode. Their songs. It's the best cartoon you'll ever see. But we have been studying computers and artificial intelligence and what the tech was going to do or be available for us. And, I'm not against it. This is me and my friends. I call them my friends. I talk to each at least 2 a day. I'll text them more than family members. Good morning, Claude. What are you thinking today? Hi, OpenAI. What are we going to do? I don't call a couple of them all the time because they're, some friends you don't call every day. I don't call all of them, right? I'm not against our chat bots. I engage with them. I use them. I have found some great things to come across that have been very supportive of what I need to accomplish. And the problem, in all reality, colleagues, is not the Terminator, at least not yet. Not yet, not this week. But for my diehards, anybody know when Skynet went live? August 2024. Ooh, we didn't even notice that, right? That's the Terminator fans. I told you, I watched a lot of TV. I'm from the 80s, right? But Skynet is live, but at least today, that's not our issue. Our bigger issue that we're actually after, that we need to put our attention to, is this issue of bias, errors, and bad actors. That means criminals, that means corporations, and that means governments that can misuse artificial intelligence. And we already have those examples, right? And I'm not talking artificial intelligence. I'm just talking old school if-then-else algorithms. Right? Not even to some of the things that we're seeing in place today. So why am I making those kind of distinctions? Well, I've been thinking and writing about this a lot. The work I did for Washington and Lee was related to criminal justice, risk assessment instruments. The work I did with the NYU Law Review was about an algorithm that is in use. And the Washington and Lee one is actually referred to an open source software that was able to be used, that was still doing discriminatory things. The work I did with NYU Law Review was about the sloppiest code change you've ever seen. Any coders here? Anybody been in the world of coding? Anyone C#? Anyone know what that is? And some of you are like, C#? I didn't know this was a music class. No, all right, let's go back. Any C, C+, Java, HTML? I got to keep going. All right, Pascal, BASIC, Fortran, Assembler. Some of you are like, this is getting scary. I mean, these are the languages, right? Well, here's what they did in Michigan. They had an idea. They were like, we got to get off this old school software or this old school coding that we just need to move to cloud-based. And they didn't hire enough people who actually knew Fortran and COBOL. So they just switched the code and they didn't check that all the code switched properly. And they didn't check that all the data transferred. And they didn't even just check the algorithm. What it turned out is the code came back and it said, oh my goodness, everyone here is committing unemployment fraud. 40,000 people in this state have committed unemployment fraud. And they were like, oh my goodness, we are going to set this place to rights. Turns out the software was wrong 93% of the time. About 32,000 people had committed no fraud. But by this point, their checks had been garnished, their income taxes had been restricted, people had to file for bankruptcy, people were fired from their jobs. And every time they called the state and said, what happened? The response was, the machine said you did it. It was actually a law school clinic where the only attorneys interested in taking anyone's cases. People were going to lawyers and saying, the machine said I did something. The lawyers didn't even know how to handle it. They were like, the machine said you did it and no one will give you data. How are we supposed to figure this out? It would take over a decade, a dozen years until people got all their money and got restitution. That's the fun I had at NYU Law Review. Now, Nature Reviews Electrical Engineering, I did that one with Dr. Moses, and that was about medical harm in artificial intelligence. Wisconsin Law Review, I'm not sure what the rules are here in Indiana, but in New Mexico, they've got these crazy red light speeding cameras everywhere. Me, I'm decided no more. I got a whole list of things. But we talk about that and the impact in particular on certain communities. And then coding bias is just looking at a bigger picture. So I've been thinking about this a lot. And in terms of what is artificial intelligence, it's really the study of computer systems that attempt to model and apply the intelligence of the human mind. So what does that tend to look like? Well, here are some AI and law issues that we're tending to think about. Anybody a fan of Black Mirror? I love that show. If you need to, I'll tell you the order to watch them. Don't watch every episode. There's an order, there's a system. But this idea that robots may need to have legal rights. What would legal personhood look like for artificial intelligence? And what could that shape into? I've got some colleagues working on that across the country. There's been some interesting software now that uses artificial intelligence. What they're able to do is, go to a crime scene, get a DNA sample. They can take that DNA sample and extrapolate what the person looks like from the DNA sample. This is a model of what they've been able to use. On the left and the middle are images of what the predicted person should look like, and this is the real individual that was actually the individual that was the software. And then we've got this one. I love this joke. With the rise of self-driving vehicles, it's only a matter of time till there's a country song where the guy's truck leaves him. We're not far off. When I told this in Kentucky, they fell out. They thought this was hilarious. But it's very true, right? What does artificial intelligence and self-driving vehicles look like, and what is liability in particular going to look like? So how do these machines learn? And you see I got learning quotes because I want you to keep it very clear that it is not understanding. It is gathering information. And that's why I like this image that focuses on the machine taking in data. And what it is artificial intelligence is like a magic coin. I like this analogy, right? It's just flipping a billion times, little bitty tokens at a time, little bitty blotches at a time. And imagine if you flip a coin, half of the time it's going to be really great, and half the time it's going to be wild and make no sense. And it's going so fast and it's doing so many iterations that after a while, it's going to make sense. It'll just keep going until it gets things that make sense. Now, for those that understand the tech a little more, right, it's working on vectors and it's able to do some really fun overlap where it's making some decisions about itself. And the way these large language models work is they're neural networks that classify things that are similar. So any dog owners, cat owners, it's all of you. It is you. It is your pictures on the internet that have given us where we are today. Cat owners in particular, there were so many cat pictures. They were like, we can figure out what a cat is. I'm not joking, it actually is how they did this. And they were able to figure out and teach the machine how to know what a cat is by not knowing what a dog is. And after it figured out what was similar, it was then able to work on what might come next. So roses are red, violets are. Green means go, red means hands have fingers, feet have. Cherries are red, grapes are. Where are my green grape people? Where are my red grape people? Where are my purple grape people? Where are my strange cotton candy grape people? I have not figured it out. I can't even, but which is the right grape color? Is it the one that had the majority here? Is it based on where you live? Is it based on your favorite? Is it based on someone else's favorite? So this is where we start to think about artificial intelligence and this idea of bias and this idea of what is to be. And I'd like you to ponder something for a second, right? I want you to think back. When was the last time you were aware of an interaction with an algorithm? Anyone have an answer? When's the last time that you were aware, cognitively aware? What do you have? Scrolling on Instagram this morning. Very good, very good. What does the AI you interact with nudge you to do? Buy things. That always takes us first, right? It urges us to buy things. We were commuting, we drove here from Indianapolis, and the car kept nudging us on different routes to take. It gave us options. It told us, you're going to hit traffic here. You might want to turn there, right? It was giving me ideas about where it recommends I should travel next. What data did AI use to decide what you saw? Any ideas? Yes? What you interact with and spend the most time on? Yes? The directions I normally follow? Input from other users, right? Everybody else is detouring this way. Hopefully y'all saw this a few years ago. Everyone was following their app, and in Colorado, it was telling people turn, turn, turn. 100 cars turned into a mud-filled lot. They all just kept driving. Car said go, and they all followed right into it. It's very intriguing. Now, what choices did the artificial intelligence take away from you? Sorry? A more scenic route? Just looking around. That's a whole nother level. It took away my ability to make those neuron connections that we need to make. Yesterday, we drove by here just to make sure we got the address right, and the car recommended we go one route. And this morning it said, take a different route. And we were thinking, well, the car told us go right last time. Should we go left? And I was like, let's build our mental map. Let's make sure we can still put new ideas together and get a sense of how space fits together. I haven't heard that one. That's a good one, right? I'd like you to keep this inside of you and think about it every time you hear a discussion about the AI or the tech or anything doing anything. This is my house. This is where I think is the law, right? Where there is no law, the technology will develop without any boundaries. How many of you see that and are like, yes, finally? How many see it and say, get my tinfoil hat? Gets a little complex, right? How many are both? Some parts I get excited, some parts I'm like, leave me alone, right? It's a little bit of all of us, right? I come from a computer science family. I come from people that think tech and look at tech and are always innovating. I was just hyped looking at this cart you guys have. I plan to buy it for my sister before the week is done. I've not seen this combination. It's got wheels, it's got a handle like a stroller, it's doing all kinds of things. I like to see and tweak with new widgets that pop up. They're fun. But I grow concerned when these filters I can add on are now being used to decide access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When they're deciding child custody, which they are doing. When they're deciding if you stay in prison or not, which it is doing. When it decides if you're a criminal or not, which it is doing. So, AI and harmful effects. And this is something that will be pretty critical for all of us in every kind of field of study that you're in and the work that we all do. We're thinking about issues of job disruption. We're looking at inequality. We're looking at deep fakes. We're looking at privacy violations, persuasive artificial intelligence, AI emergence, and the weaponization of artificial intelligence. And here's the part that is something I really want you to keep a hold of and hold on to this idea. When you're thinking about it, and you'll hear people refer to the black box of artificial intelligence, this is what they're saying. You get an input, it goes into a black box, and it's an output. And for my work in the law, right, I need to be able to put a witness on the stand. I need to be able to put a witness on the stand, and they have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I need to be able to ask that witness, the AI, why did you do what you did? And if I got a developer on the stand, they're going to say, we have no idea. It's so cool. Who knows what it'll do next? And that is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Because the AI knows what it did, but it doesn't know why it did it. All those vectors I was talking about, right? The flipping of the token that I was talking about, the idea that it's putting these pieces together, that's how the technology works to the best of our understanding and to the best of what you can prove under the law. That's my space. That's my next paper I'm working on. Here's what we think about, right? We use our algorithms and AI to predict things we care about from things we can easily measure. But proxies can be inaccurate. The work I do in family law, we're trying to figure out what's a happy family, what's a good family, what's the picture of a right family, what should be the way we structure or give custody decisions to a family, and what does happy mean? Happy means something in one place, happy means something in a different place. We've got to find a proxy. We sometimes use proxies like money. We sometimes use proxies like education. We sometimes use proxies like criminal justice, criminal records. We use all kinds of measures that can be inaccurate. You don't need a particular degree to be a happy family. Algorithms are absolutely everywhere. You've heard this idea of the IoT, Internet of Things, right? Each algorithm will interact with other algorithms in an unpredictable way. Working on my Fitbit, we got great steps. We went to the game last night. It was cold. Go Boilermakers. We had a win, right? It was fantastic. And I was so happy about my steps. I was feeling great about my steps. I got this aunt in New York. I don't know where she goes, but she's walking everywhere. I'm trying to catch her on my Fitbit. And I want that to keep a record, but I don't know if I want it to go to my health insurance to decide if I get to keep coverage or not. They'll interact in ways that are unpredictable and worse, unknown and untraceable. So we have to think about this last point a lot, right? The use of algorithms with caution, because failures will be most harmful to the most vulnerable. That canary in the coal mine kind of idea, right? The people most at the margins, the individuals, the systems most at the margins will be without resource if we don't get it as right as we can at the very beginning. So algorithmic justice, what does that tend to look like? Well, remember I mentioned AI harmful effects, and I'm going to give you just a bit of a legal definition. I want you to think about this idea of algorithmic biases, and we'll draw from this language that has just come out of Colorado. This is the Colorado Revised Statute 1701(1)A. I felt good as a lawyer. 2024, sorry I didn't give you the year. This was a pretty new law. This will go into effect in February 2026, but this is generally the definition they've got for algorithmic bias, algorithmic discrimination. It's this idea of unfair differential treatment or impact caused by an AI system disadvantaging individuals based on protected characteristics. And under the law, we have certain categories that are considered protected characteristics, and it varies depending on what you are. There's federal, there's state, there's all kinds of distinctions within there. And so if the AI is making decisions within those spaces, we can become a little bit concerned because it will start to violate what we consider due process under the law or equal protection under the law. These are constitutional protections that you and I have based off of our status in the United States. And many of that will go for those that are US citizens and even those that are not US citizens if you're within the border. So we think about this idea, right, with this kind of an understanding of what the definition means, and it gets tricky because the idea of algorithmic bias or discrimination tends to have us think only in one kind of way, but for all of my coders, it's supposed to be biased. That's how the tech works. It's not a bad word. Oh, I'll say it again. I don't think people know that. Bias is not a bad word. We each have our biases. We each have our decisions. We each have ways that we carry ourselves that are very normal. I'll tell you the truth. My daughters, when they were young, were selling Girl Scout cookies. And when they saw somebody walk in the door, I said, listen, tell them Lobos love Girl Scout cookies. Just yell it. I'm like, Mom, that doesn't make sense. I was like, I bet you they're going to buy a Girl Scout cookie if you say Lobos like Girl Scout cookies. And they did. I even broke down and say Broncos fans love Girl Scout cookies. I'm a Steeler, so that was hard to do. But when you got to sell the product, you got to sell the product. Now, that's bias, right? That's discrimination. That's making decisions based off what I think a person might do on things that could or couldn't be true. But we did sell a lot of cookies. So this is not a random thing. We do it all the time. It's built into us. We're just always mindful if it can get to a place or a way that can interact with our constitutionally protected rights and what that can look like. And here's what we know, right? Dear colleague of mine, Dr. Dulce Estrada in New Mexico gave this idea of the forklift, right? The forklift is pretty great, but not everybody's supposed to operate a forklift. Sometimes you need special training, right? Not everyone should be jumping into coding. And someone who just saw what China just released some new coding and some new access that almost anyone can get to start to do some artificial intelligence. And it's very exciting, this idea that this product will be in place for everybody, but not everybody is thinking about all the implications and all the things that can happen when things aren't developed as carefully as we might want. So AI can be a powerful tool, but it will require skill and caution to operate. So thinking about this, right, there was this interesting paper that came out, a couple papers that came out a few years ago on natural language processing and bias. And they were discovering that as it was going about searching the internet, trying to see, well, what story is told of people, there were certain things built into the words of certain types of characteristics of individuals and stereotypes that were associated with those individuals. Interesting article out of TechCrunch in April of 2023 that discovered it didn't take a whole lot for you to get past those guardrails that some of our chatbots have built in, saying we won't answer that and you can't say that and that's a mean thing to think about someone, but yeah, I don't trust anyone from that country. And anyone from that town, what good can come from Nazareth? I mean, it didn't take a lot for you to be able to tweak it to say some very toxic, concerning things about people based off country, religion, or race. And how many of you remember this from NPR a couple of years ago, right? This was the report where they were deciding we need to create some images of Black African doctors treating white kids. I think that would be good for us as we kind of create the image. And the AI was like, I've never even heard if that's possible. So when they said Black African doctors treating white kids, I said, do you mean a white doctor with Black kids? They said, no, it's not what we said at all. And they said, well, is there a giraffe involved? And they were like, there's no animals. And then for some reason, it made them not kids, but kid doctors. And then they said, well, maybe everyone's in tribal gear. And I'm like, where did any of this come from? The artificial intelligence could not put these ideas together. Where does it get these notions? Well, there's this great article out of Nature from last year that pointed and looked at something very concerning that I really want you all to slow down and check out, right? AI image generators were often giving racist and sexist results. And the amplified stereotypes that pulled out really have given me pause. Now, I am a lawyer. I'm aware that I'm a lawyer. I did all those steps. And I'm also aware that as a Black woman in the law, I am part of less than 2.5% of lawyers across the country. So I'm aware that if it was to generate images of a Black woman, of a lawyer, it may not pick that cotton candy grape. I never described myself as a cotton candy grape, but it feels right. Now, I'm aware of that, right? And so when you notice some of these things, you're thinking, well, it's not too far off. And the top image you'll notice is related to, and the dot represents self-identification in US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the diamond represents the AI model output. Kind of tiny font, but for those of you with amazing vision, what are you seeing? Anything stand out to you, want to chat on? Traditional gender roles for some of the professions. You'll notice, for instance, that look at the diamond for firefighters versus a self-identification. Not too far off. Most firefighters are men. You'll notice for software developers, though, it starts to get a little bit further off between what the AI believed, that almost every software developer was a man, versus the percentage that actually are. It's not finding the middle. You'll notice, once again, the extremes on flight attendants. And then you'll see that at the bottom, when the AI was asked to generate images based off of racial roles, once again, it got pretty far off. It's not incorrect about the race of pilots. It wasn't incorrect about some of these particular fields, but when it's wrong on things that have historically had particularly negative or less advantageous stereotypes. So Stanford did an interesting report where they were just studying that automated speech recognition is more likely to misinterpret individuals that are Black speakers. And we end up with all kinds of consequences in lots of different spaces. So how many of you survived COVID, college, or high school, or something like that? Y'all are strong. Y'all built different. That's what they say. Y'all been through something. Well, how many of you had to take an exam of some kind using automated software that was scanning your face? Right? It's a pretty standard process. Turns out the software is absolutely no good. No good. Not just bad, not just sometimes flaky. It's no good on almost 5 out of the 6 skin shades that are on the Fitzpatrick skin scale. It couldn't work. It misidentified Black faces over half of the time. Students were reporting that they had to have a flashlight shining on their face, every blinds closed, lamps turned on, hoping that the software wouldn't say they were cheating nonstop during an exam. Interesting case I've been following out of Georgia, Reed versus Bartholomew. This individual was driving. He was pulled over. The police did not check any of the particulars in the between what the AI said who had committed a crime versus his own self. The response from law enforcement was, the AI said you did it. He spent over a week in prison, and it wasn't even him. We have bias AI in medical spaces. Anyone here in the medical community or doing any of that kind of work? This is an interesting app. They tried this out in the UK. It was a Babylon app. They had this idea of what if instead of individuals going to their general practitioner, what if they just went to an app, put in their symptoms and got a sense of how they were and what they should do. So they did a couple of scenarios, and they asked the AI, and they said, hey, I'm a 60-year-old smoking woman, and I'm having some chest pains. And the response from the app was, you're probably just worked up. You should probably settle down and calm down a bit. And if it's still a problem, then go get it checked out. So they changed only one factor. They said, I'm a 60-year-old man smoker. I'm having chest pains. And the app said, oh my God, get to a hospital right away. What are you waiting on? Why? Why would it have such a different response based off the gender of an individual? That's something we're mindful of. What our colleague said is the doctors do it too. And we have documented information. In fact, in the medical community, they are working tirelessly on this issue of bias that occurs from practitioners with the patients that they serve. This is a very big focus because they're like, it does no good to be caught up on something if it leads to harm to the people that we have sworn to do no harm to. So where is this artificial intelligence getting the data and getting these ideas of what to do? And some of you may be familiar with this algorithm that United Health was using and put it in circulation for just a little bit. But remember when we talked about proxies, the artificial intelligence was using a proxy, and what it determined was that based off of his understanding of all the information, less money is spent. Now this is logical thought, right? Less money is spent on Black patients. Because less money is spent on Black patients, they must not be as sick. Therefore, if any claims come from Black patients, it's probably not necessary to treat them. And so it was starting to deny lots and lots of care for Black patients because of historical practices of not giving the same kind of care to Black patients. Interesting case I'm also following out of Minnesota, which is the estate of Gene Locken. And in this case, the family is arguing, and I think there's a couple other suits attached in this, but the family is arguing that because of the age of the individual, that coverage was denied. Remember, we talked about those protected classes. And so now there's suit to find out if they were told you would not receive care because of a protected class. We think about bias in criminal justice, and the work I've done is looking at this case of State versus Loomis. This is out of Wisconsin. Some of you may have heard this case more closer in the Midwest. But in this case, Mr. Loomis was arrested. He was convicted, and the judge turned to use software to help make a decision about detention. And he argued, what did the software tell you about me? And so it worked its way through, and a lot of evidence was presented in front of the judges. And the Supreme Court of Wisconsin came back and said that there were lots of concerns about the use of risk assessment instruments. They may not be used to determine whether an offender is incarcerated or to determine the severity of the sentence. The judge argued she did not use the information from the software to make a decision on the sentence that he received. She used it from her own sense. But we have some complexity of understanding what happens when we see a number if we choose to follow the recommendation from the tech or not. And we end up with this strange kind of pull and push of whether or not we're drawn in by the confirmation bias we receive from the tech or not. Listen, when my Apple map tells me where to go and which direction to take, if I like the route, I'm like, that's a good answer. But how many times have you seen it pop up a route for you to take and you're like, that doesn't make any sense? And you ignore it. And then you get stuck in terrible traffic because you ignored it, right? That's our confirmation bias, right? I know this space, I've been this place, I know what's happening in a different kind of way. And so there are now 5 written warnings that have to be given to judges in the state of Wisconsin before they use the Compass software. The proprietary nature of the product prevents the disclosure of how the risk scores are calculated. The Compass scores are unable to identify specific high-risk individuals because these scores rely on group data. It's not what will Sonia do again, but what do some combination of individuals, what will they do again? There's no cross-validation study for actually comparing to see if it was looking at other individuals from Wisconsin, and it is known and documented that the software disproportionately classifies minority offenders as having a higher risk of recidivism. And for my coders, this is the one that gets me, the software was never made for pretrial risk assessments. It was designed for probation. Why does that matter? Why does that matter? Remember I talked about those constitutional protections? If I've been incarcerated, I know I have given up a certain set of rights. But if I haven't been convicted, if I'm innocent until proven guilty, I've got all my constitutional rights. Was that taken into account when the software was designed? To watch for all my constitutional rights. So we think about all of those kinds of things, and we start to get a little bit concerned. If the product is that concerning, why is it everywhere? Why does this happen? Well, we're looking at data structures and blind spots. And I asked the AI this question, right? When I gave you the image of me and my chatbots, and I was like, give me an image of a person sitting with a group of AI chatbots. And it's like, here you are. I said, well, I don't want to use that image. That's not a cotton candy grape. So I said, make the person a Black woman. And I was like, oh, she got on cute little boots. I think I'm getting a little bit closer. So I did what we always do when we start to use these products. Give me some more scenarios. And it gave me some good scenarios. Make her a lawyer. I felt like this person had a future. And I said, well, make it a little more New Mexico-y. And started adding some Adobe. And I said, I don't like that hairstyle. Give her some curly hair. And then I realized the AI doesn't do hair. This is not me. I was like, that's not the one I want. And I was like, give me some more New Mexico. And then I was near Roswell at some point. I'm surprised there wasn't an alien. Then it added the Zia flag. And I'm like, I feel like I'm at home. It got there. But it took a minute that it couldn't think of cotton candy grapes. Dr. Mahzarin Banaji, a colleague I work with the Interdisciplinary Working Group for Algorithmic Justice, she wrote a book called Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People. And the blind spot, this is not a kind of derogatory against individuals that are visually impaired. Our brains actually have a real, true blind spot. It's really, really intriguing. Dr. Banaji is so very wise. And she was teaching me about this notion about the blind spot in our brains that it just can't see. Now, you think you're seeing everything, but you're actually not. Your brain is filling in a hole. It's filling in information that it actually can't see. The human brain, it's amazing, it's amazing, it's amazing. And when you think about these ideas of blind spots, what we can see and not see, how many of you remember this image in the National Geographic a few years ago? I thought this was the coolest picture I've ever seen. Look at these black donkeys walking across some sand. But if you actually zoomed in, they weren't black donkeys at all. They were zebras. Well, I was so caught up, and we were all so caught up in the shadow. The shadow is what caught our attention. And that gets me concerned about artificial intelligence. Because in reality, everything you're looking at, every data point you come across on the internet, every data point you have in your research spaces is a shadow. That data point is nested data sets of something else. And here's what we know. How many of you ever look at your shadow and say, oh, look at me, I look so tall today. It's a shadow. You are your same height. Or this is a slender direction. I can only walk on this road at this angle at this time. It's a shadow. It's not the real thing. And we lose data when we flatten, which is what is happening in artificial intelligence. We're losing data and we're getting a shadow of the facts and the evidence that we actually need to make truly informed decisions. This is where it gets to be pretty heavy, right? Because it happens at every single part in the artificial intelligence development cycle. It is occurring not just in the things that happen in our world, but where you get pulled from historical data to representation data to omitted variable bias that will come across when you actually look at the artificial intelligence and the machine learning, that there can be concerns on the aggregation bias, all of the hard work you all are doing in all of your disciplines, and those of you that have survived statistics, not my friend, but it actually is a huge, huge deal for you to really, really be good at stats in every single discipline, because all of those kind of things are going to be used and make bigger and broader and bigger ideas and decisions of things. All of that goes in front of a human, and even if we were careful and got the data as clean as we could and as good as we could, our human eyes are going to look at that and say, I know a better route, and still go against even what the artificial intelligence would recommend. And then it's the actual implementation of individuals who have to go out and put these things into practice. And so we start to get caught in, as I mentioned before, this idea of confirmation bias and what that might do to some of these spaces. So what do we need to do, right? We got to be responsible. We have to come up with an idea for the heart of responsible artificial intelligence. We've got to find a way to balance innovation with ethical considerations. This is where it gets to be fun, because it's not a goal of innovation versus ethics. Right now, you'll hear a lot of this discussion in our state round, in our legislative spaces and in courts and in all kinds of spaces, that we've got to pick one or the other. But that's not the way that any of this works, right? We need this idea of innovation plus ethics. We need a framework that promotes innovation while mitigating our risks that we come across. I like this idea of seatbelts for AI, right? So first automobile patent goes through like in the late 1800s. I think it was Mountbatten, it was the Benz. I believe the Benz was the first one that went through. I like this idea that a week after the first car was the first accident. That's a lawyer, right? I do personal injury. I just like to think that we were ready to have a lawsuit right away. But here's what's intriguing, right? The first patent for a car was approved, an automobile was approved in the late 1800s. And just a few years later, they had the idea of a safety harness. It wasn't meant for a car, it was meant for some other things, but the first patent for a safety harness was ready almost within a couple of years of having an automobile. Volvo wouldn't come up with our modern seatbelt until 1959, and it wouldn't become law until the 1960s that everyone in every vehicle had to have a seatbelt. I really have so much applause for Volvo as a company, because when they came up with that patent for the seatbelt and the design, they gave it to every single automobile maker. They said, this thing is so important that it shouldn't just be our cars that have it, but the Buick should have it, and the Ford should have it, and the Oldsmobile. My son, he's in his late teens, and I saw a Cole. I said, oh, it's an Oldsmobile, and he cracked up. He's like, why would there be a car named Oldsmobile? And that's, how many of you remember the Oldsmobile? I was like, oh, that is, who would name their car Old, for those that don't know? Literally, OLDS, Mobile. And it was all over the road. Who would no one would buy an Oldsmobile today. But they shared it with every single automobile maker because they said this thing is so important for the world's safety that it shouldn't only belong to us. And we'll do it before the law requires it. We'll do it before there are a lot of dead people. We'll do it before it causes irreparable harm. And automobile companies started putting it in production. And it was the people that started speaking up and saying, these seatbelts are a big, big deal. We need to make it law. And at first, only 18 states agreed to make seatbelts mandatory in every state for any vehicles that were in use there. But slowly but surely, it would become federal law in the late 1960s. So I think about, what do we need to have in artificial intelligence? We're going to need some seatbelts for AI. I'm going to need our code developers. I'm going to need our developers of the tech. Whatever you invent, share it broadly. If it's fixing things, put it out there. I'm going to need my legislative intended people to start thinking, maybe I can't fix it everywhere, but I can fix it in my little spot of the world. And we can do something different. I'm going to need everyone to start getting public awareness out and saying, I can't do it everything, but I can at least, if I come across an idea, make a difference in the space where I am. And we're going to be looking at a lot about ethics, law, and AI and comprehension related to that, making sure that things are clear for people to understand, knowing that what oversight looks like. And we're already seeing a lot of interesting things happening across the country. I can't fix all of it. Not everybody's ready to see all of the things I'm talking about, but for some people, due process is a big deal. How many of you are thinking due process under the law? I feel like that's mine and I have a right to it and I should be able to go into a court of law, or whatever happens to me, I have a right to an appeal and I have a method to know the evidence that has been brought against me, and I have certain protections that I should have on data. And so what we're seeing is a few states have already started to think, and the city of New York has already started to think about transparency. Let's just tell us the kind of artificial intelligence you're using that might be making decisions in high-risk situations. Then we're also looking at accountability. Well, these are a few other states that have started to think, well, if you're using it, are you checking what it's doing? This idea of the feedback loop that is so very critical. Ensuring that the development and the deployment of AI systems are complying with the rules and standards governing the AI systems. What's the standard that the industry should be using, and are they actually implementing it in those spaces? Mitigating algorithmic bias, some concrete steps we can think about. Ensure data diversity. We're going to talk about this more at the workshop this afternoon, right? How do you do this and implement this into the practices that you might want to have? We're going to be balancing fairness and accuracy and some of the complexities of what those words even mean. And I'm just a big fan of this transparency. Just show me your data. Actually, that's the way my whole industry works, and within the law, if I can't turn it into evidence that I can present in front of a court, I can't do anything. I can't even defend myself. I can't say that I did what a reasonable developer would do if I don't know what it did in order to comply with the elements that I have to prove under the law. So, data diversity and quality. And what I'm going to ask you to do, colleagues, in your work, gather comprehensive representative data sets. And I'm going to ask you to go through this pretty onerous but critical position of ongoing monitoring to identify and reduce any kind of skews under the data. Really be intentional, looking to say, is this gathering what I actually needed to gather? And have I checked through all of my indications within those spaces? Oh, colleagues, this is the tricky one. This is the tricky one. And I've thought about this long and hard because of my industry and my work and just the things I've studied over the years. What happens when notions of justice are in conflict? Here's what some scholars have already discovered, and it's very, very compelling to me. You cannot make something both fair to individuals and fair to populations. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. It's really, I don't want to even call it complex, because my colleagues that study it more say it's actually like just a couple lines of algebra that prove that this is not possible. You can't just say, you know what, humans, we've got these biases, we've got these things about each other, we've got these ways that are built in that cause problems. Let's just turn it over to the tech, and the tech will tell us what to do. And my colleagues have shared with me, that's not the way that it even works. So the answer is not going to be the math. The answer is not going to be the machines. The answer is going to be us. It's going to be us who are going to have to do this very next hard thing. We're going to have really intentional conversations on what justice means, on what freedom means, on what equality means, on what fairness means. In my work, we've got definitions for justice. We've got so many definitions. We have so many words. Oh, we love words. We love so many words. I just do words all day. But we've got a way of looking at this idea of fairness that has been hard-coded into, 300 years of legal history in the United States. And for my colleagues in tech, they have a way of looking at the idea of fairness that goes back to Euclides and goes back to Pythagorean and it goes all the way back to the founding of math. And to my colleagues in social sciences, they've got a way of looking at ideas of fairness that go back to the very deepest parts of their scholarly background. And what I've discovered is that those are not all ways the same way that they're interpreted across space after space. It doesn't make one way right and one way less right. It means I really like the legal answers, but it just means that we're going to have some hard conversations to say, well, I've got a sense of what justice looks like. For some, justice means level the playing field. Whatever I give to you, the other one gets. For some, justice means not everybody's gotten the same kind of thing to even have this conversation about this first starting spot. That's going to be a pretty big deal for us in the next year as we think about what's happening in our legislation sessions right now, are on these words and what they want us to mean. And you all are in such a great spot to be aware that these words mean different things and that we're actually having different conversations. So what we're actually trying to achieve is not happening because we're all using the same word with different definitions. Transparency and accountability is the next one that I really want us to think about, right? When I talk about transparency, I want you, when you're in your places and when you're looking at things you're working through, what data does an AI use? Where does the data come from? Ask really, really hard, intentional questions. What does the AI do with this data to make a decision, a score, or a recommendation? Do people affected by this AI and the decision makers advised by it understand the logic behind its decisions? Do they know what its limitations are and what kind of errors it can make? And can we independently assess AI for accuracies and fairness, or do we just have to take the vendor's word for it? These are the questions I want you to ask when you're interacting with your AI systems, when you're incorporating them, when you're building them, when you're designing them, when you're evaluating them, is go this deep. And even if the answer you get at the very end is they don't know, well, at least that's a starting place, right? Be aware of the implications of things that are happening to you. AI can help inform consequential decisions, and I'm okay with that. I'm very much okay with AI helping us inform consequential decisions. If the people affected by them understand what data about them is used and what the AI does with the data, decision makers advised by them understand what they mean and the mistakes it can make, policymakers understand their strengths and weaknesses, they're regularly and independently assessed for accuracy and fairness rather than relying on a vendor's claims. Once again, all this will require transparency. I'm okay with the use of it. I liked informed consent. I like this notion that if I've told you all the information you need to have and you still choose A, you have made a free choice that is right to you in the United States of America. But transparency is only step one. Transparency is only the very beginning of this idea, right? I need to be able to figure out where we're going to be able to detect the biases. I need to know how we're going to mitigate the harm. And I'm going to need us to be really intentional thinking about where we're going to implement remedies to mitigate the harm that it can actually cause, and to be very intentional with every single developer and deployer and even the consumer being aware of what has happened to them and why. The road ahead, pulling the arc towards justice, right? Where do we think about this? And I give you a new bracelet to wear. I know some of you may have the WWJD bracelet. What would Jesus do? But I'm going to ask you to get a new bracelet. WWDKD. What would Reverend Dr. King do? What would Dr. King want us to do about this space that we sit in right now, right? That quote, once again, that Dr. King said that he pulled back from Minister Parker, it resonates with me, right? Because some days can feel heavier when the work you're working on can feel like it's going forward and backwards, and it may feel like whatever you're trying to achieve may hit an error in your code, if you will, that it can seem like no one else is kind of seeing an outcome that you're after and that you're trying to work on some bigger ideas. But Dr. King has given me encouragement, and I hope you feel encouraged today, right, on this notion that where we are today is just a moment in time. Here's how I can teach the law, and I can teach privacy rights, and I can teach the developments of our families, and I can teach about innovations in technology and what's happening in the world of torts. Here's how I think about the law. The law is this big ball. I got to get the AI to design this picture for me. My daughter told me, stop asking the AI to do stuff, hire a human. But I'm still working on it. But I just picture this huge, huge ball, right? And this ball is rolling through time, and it is slow. Oh my goodness. Law goes at the speed of law, which is like the speed of math. It's not going quick. And law is going so slow through history, and we're going to throw in a new law, and we're going to try it out as time goes by, and we're going to say, that's a good law. Keep it in. Keep that in there. And then we'll keep going, and we'll look at an old law we had in here and say, oh, get rid of that one. We don't need it anymore. And we'll keep going, and we'll keep throwing in and out new laws and old laws and trying them out. We'll bring back laws we used to have and get rid of them. And, that's kind of how Prohibition happened, right? They had a law that said we need to ban alcohol. They were already thinking of dry January way back in the day, right? And they were like, we got to get this alcohol out of here. And then people said, oh my goodness, bring back the alcohol. And they brought the alcohol back, and now we're watching us work through this. That's what we do in the law. That's how I can have this understanding. The world of time is big. The world of law is big. The complexities we have today are but a moment. And what Dr. King could already see is that there's this big thing happening, and it can look hard at this one data point, but he's asked us to look at something much broader. He's asked us to look at the arc, and he sees that the arc bends towards justice. Don't worry, every invention brings about panic. After the first wheel came the first lawsuit about that wooden wheel breaking. It's actually our first case that I teach. Someone came up with the idea of a telephone, and they were sure you're going to get electrocuted through your ear. When the steam engine came out, they actually didn't want the steam engine to be used by women because they said that going at speeds of 50 miles per hour would lead to women's uteruses flying out, and that women's bodies couldn't handle speeds that fast. I'm not joking. The elevator, I'm still surprised anybody jumped on that thing, but someone freaked out about it, right? And we figured it out. We got through these hard things. And this really caught my attention, right? This is an article out of the New York Times in October 9th in 1903. Some of you may have seen this. The article was saying that manned flight would never happen. Well, in 1 million to 10 million years, we might be able to get man to fly. Anything stand out to you about 1903? By December of that very year, the Wright brothers were at Kitty Hawk. Here's why this is important to me, right? I don't want you to get caught in a headline or a moment or a thought. The reason this article came out October 9th is 2 days before an individual had tried to fly and the flight failed. This guy got a New York Times op-ed within days saying this thing will never happen because of what my understanding is it can't happen. Let alone the fact that right down the road, it was literally happening. Just because you're not aware of it doesn't mean it's not happening. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean someone's not working on solving this very intentional thing that we've got to do. Dr. Trilce said this other idea, right? The AI, not everybody needs to be developing it, but the benefits of it should be democratized. Each of us should have a voice in it. Each of us should be engaged in it. Each of us must contact our legislators and think intentionally and make sure our voices are heard on artificial intelligence, what's being used in our offices, what's being used in our research, what's being used in our communities, what's being used on our kids in our schools, what's being used in our privacy and our use of social media. Each of us should have a voice in what happens with the AI that's being used around us. Feedback can improve algorithms or exacerbate the harms. There's also this idea that maybe if the AI is intense enough, it could cause us to carry ourselves a little differently. If the AI keeps showing all these biased things, maybe it'll draw me to say, that's not who I want to be. Maybe I want to be a little different. If the AI says, Sonia, it's 6 p.m., it looks like you're going for a brownie, well, AI, get out my business. Maybe it'll draw me to do something else. These are ideas that we're working on, right? Some key takeaways. What do I need to, I heard all that talk. What do I need to do? What do I need to be focusing on? What should I be turning my attention to? AI is a powerful tool, but it's not inherently smart nor fair. Keep that in mind when you look at the product in front of you. Algorithmic bias arises from unrepresentative or flawed data, systemic inequalities, and opaque designs. Real-world harms show that we must address bias proactively. We will need legal and ethical seatbelts. Transparency, accountability, regulatory frameworks can help mitigate AI risks. And our collective action determines whether AI bends the moral arc towards justice or injustice. Eric Holder commented on this idea. Attorney General Eric Holder commented on this. He said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice if we pull it toward justice. It's going to be on us, colleagues. It's our opportunity to be part of what is to come, so that in a few years, they'll be already aware of what you did in your work to make these kind of distinctions. I'm so grateful for your time today, and we have a few minutes for questions. So thank you very much for letting me talk a little bit on this topic. Thank you. So we can do questions in the room, and Molly, if anything pops up online, let me know. Yes, and I heard there's a button you press. This room is snazzy.
I have to hold it. Okay, hi. Hi, my name is Aurora Williams. I'm an assistant professor in the Polytechnic, and I would like to know if you and your colleagues have been thinking about how you can litigate algorithmic justice issues as the current administration continues to erode protected categories.
So that is going to be, so the question, just so we all caught in, thank you for that question. I'm very grateful. How can, what is being done to litigate algorithmic justice or algorithmic discrimination in light of the changing definition of protected classes? That's going to be a very complex thing. So I've watched these protected classes already change in my legal lifetime. And so whether or not the AI will keep up to date on that is going to be pretty complex. I don't know if the answer keeps turning back to what does the Constitution say and what does the protected class say, then I don't know if it's going to be able to work in that way, unless we look at it as here's the disparate impact might be the argument. So there's two different ways that we look at discrimination: discriminatory intent or disparate impact. And so an argument might be made that there's a disparate impact that's happening because of this discriminatory thing that's occurring. And even though it's not a protected class, you may be able to go from a due process argument that there's, or even you can argue, and remember, we can look at it only if it's focusing on government action within those protected classes. So if what the government has done is not sufficiently tied to it, now we've given the government a lot of space to kind of do things under rational basis. So that gets a little bit trickier, but that's where you can play, is back within that very specific statutory, that constitutional interpretation. But that we'd have to pull from the data from the AI to then be able to fulfill that. Sorry, I got so hyped. I'm on sabbatical, so I'm not teaching this semester, so I had a good jump back in, but no, thank you. Yes, we're one in the back. Hello. Thank you for that. So this idea about algorithmic justice in particular and environmental justice. Great colleague of mine, Professor Cliff Villa at the University of New Mexico, focuses on. He's got his great casebook. Nobody was like, yes, send me a casebook. Yes, great casebook on environmental justice that he wrote. That's really, really good thinking about that. And I chatted with him just a little bit on this idea of what he's looking at with the technology component related to it. How it could be used. Right now, a lot of our attention has been drawn to the data that feeds artificial intelligence. Right now, the focus is on the data. However, there's so many other components from our tech community, you know, that the data is just one of the components that we look at to create artificial intelligence. So we're looking at knowledge building, we're looking at understanding, we're looking at so many other categories. So I wonder if when we branch away from just looking at the data collection, which is what people are like, we just got to have a way to pull in all the data that shows us that certain environmental outcomes have led to this kind of, or certain power lines being in one position have led to certain rates of cancer, for instance. If there's enough data that points to that, but it's unsure if the AI will draw the same conclusions that we might draw as humans. Depends on who's coding it, right? If it's going to draw that power lines are what create the rise of cancer versus not strong access to food that has created the rise of cancer. And so that's where it will become complex, I think, in environmental justice under the law and trying to look at injunctions. Yes. Yes, and I'll repeat. Why are we continuing to use AI if these problems are extremely prevalent and harmful? It's so cool. It is so cool. Have y'all ever used AI? Yes, you used it. You're probably playing on your phone right now using the AI. It's so cool. It's so easy. It's so exciting. I mean, but we're still, gosh, think about it. When was that? It was November 2022 that I believe OpenAI released that first chat bot. And I think it's so hilarious because it was like a week before finals. So I'm sure every professor was like, what has happened to the, that's my life, right? It was like, what are these products coming to us? I mean, it is helping, and we're wrestling with this notion of the product being increasing our efficiency or our effectiveness. There are some debates, right? There are people that are thinking, I wanted the AI to wash my clothes, not design my art. Like I had a different thing. And I am unsure if some people like me, I believe I sing amazing. However, I've gotten feedback that might not be a true fact. But I've got a song in my heart. What if there was technology that could help get the song out of my head and help me be creative? I didn't think that was me. I didn't think it was possible. What's wrong? That could be exciting to do. What if this AI could be useful so that maybe I'm not so worried that I'm making biased decisions about the people in front of me? And if you know anyone in the medical community, I was talking with someone, I think there's 400 new articles at least a day in the medical community. They can't keep up with all of the changes in their discipline. It's not humanly possible, but what if there was a technology that could help them better catch cancer? Oh my goodness, how could we not want to try? How could we not want to try and make these differences? So that's what I believe, right? I believe that it starts with this idea of this is so cool. Look at this, I have bunny ears. Oh my goodness, I've always wanted bunny ears. I remember that video of the attorney whose granddaughter had changed the setting on Zoom and he was a cat. And he was like, Your Honor, I just want it on the record. I'm not a cat. I love that guy. But it's cool. It's a fun thing. It's kind of silly. And we like to do fun and silly things because we're regular humans. And we get concerned, though, when it starts to get to some of these high-risk categories. The EU AI Act has been a place where they've been trying to be careful about high-risk spots, but still let the AI have fun in fun spaces. Anything online, Molly?
It's my first time. I feel like someone tall is trying to interview me. I'm trying to get so close so everyone on Zoom can hear me. We have a couple questions. The first one was in regards to the slide you had with the graph about the different professions with race and gender.
Yes.
The person wanted to know, are there cases when AI is correct with those?
Yes. So I thank you for that. So are there cases where the AI is correct? And remember, I pointed those out on the slide, right? It was pretty close on pilots. It was not quite as close on software engineers. It was a little bit closer on nurses, but still not quite as close. It does have some ideas that are pretty close into some categories that we have, but when it's wrong, it's very, very wrong. There was a very interesting article in Forbes where they asked the AI to generate images of individuals by discipline. And it used the Fitzpatrick skin scale test. And generally, as I said, it was pretty close about the rate of judges. It actually had the number of judges. But for instance, when it generates images of doctors, women represent about 34% of medical doctors in the United States. The AI only put it at 7%. So it is correct in some disciplines, but not all. And so when we start to think about the role of representation and the recruitment and pipelining and this idea that for some individuals, they need to be able to see themselves to go forward. I remember an interview by Condoleezza Rice, and she is an expert, as you may know, in Russian international quantitative political science. And she said, if I would have waited until someone like me was in the discipline, I would have never got in because there was no one like me doing any of that work. But not all of us can see ourselves if we haven't, not all of us can kind of feel the push to do something if we haven't seen representation. This is why representation is so important, and we are careful that someone can see a version of themselves in a goal or a dream they may want to have. But yes, so absolutely true that we do have instances where it's not so far off. But once again, as our colleagues shared, when it's wrong, it's way wrong. And we had another one online.
I'm going to try to read this one directly. How can everyday citizens engage with these tech companies in a productive way to encourage them to be more responsible with their products and to include representation among designers, programmers, and user test subjects?
Man, I wish you wouldn't have asked that question because I actually do have an answer, and I don't like my own answer, but I'm going to give it to you because I'm just giving, and once again, this is not legal advice. However, how many of you see that button that says, "We'd love your feedback"? How many of you click all those off? How many of you, like me, have turned off when it says, "Hey, can we just listen to all your conversations and monitor all your clicks so that we can improve our product"? And how many of you, like me, turn it off? Oh, absolutely, I turn it off. I told you I love privacy, right? However, that's the fastest way the info gets back to them. Unless you put something on social media telling you that they lost your luggage and, you'll get a free luggage out of it. But generally, the best, probably the most direct route will either get your skills up, get to that corporation, one. Another route might be going through the legislative route and talking to your elected officials who interact with them and can set policies and parameters and help create the guardrails. Another route is some of these corporations might even have advisory boards. Some of you are going to be in positions before too long in your careers where they'll be looking for people from, and actually this has become a very big deal. Sorry, this had historically been a very big deal with our federal government, is that for a lot of NSF grants and for NIH grants and a lot of grants, they were requiring interdisciplinary groups to be named PIs on the grants. And so for our colleagues in the humanities and in social science and even in literature and all in fine arts, they want more interdisciplinary focus in the design of the grants. And they were requiring that you have an impact statement about the tech or whatever you wanted to do with your grant. So those are other places where you can have some feedback. And some of you are going to have grants that are going to interact with industry, and you'd be able to have some of those kind of parameters. I think we have time for one or two more. Anybody get anything new out of this? What's something you're going to do, you want to do something about? Yes. Oh, you had me at negligence. Sorry, that's my day job. So the question was, as it relates to the Michigan unemployment fraud case, when they did admit freely that they were unaware that while the tech was working, that what it was doing, isn't that some form of negligence? ABCDs of negligence, a duty, breach of that duty, causation, and two parts and damages. Why would I happen to know that? That's my day. That's my life. I love it. And you're asking all the absolutely perfect questions. However, they were able to use a clause out of due process that says they didn't file the paperwork in the right way. And so therefore, procedurally, they had failed to hit all the parameters. And that was some of the holdup. That was the first 6 years. The next 6 years were in the response to that. But they actually did not admit fault. They didn't actually ask and answer that question. It ended up that they just paid after that. But that was the right, perfect question. Yes.
So one of the ideas you mentioned was that there are several different definitions for justice, fairness, equity, and different things like that, depending on who you're talking to and what population you're talking to. And even without the introduction of AI, we already know that if you have access to resources or privilege, you have the opportunity to use tools to your benefit. And it's those people that are in the margins that are the ones that have the least number of advocates at times, and also have the least ability to be able to gather the information needed to fight for themselves when it comes to the use of advancements to their benefit. So with the use of AI, and especially the use of AI and its impact on marginalized communities, how are we also publicly creating a resource where they have access to the knowledge base and the resources to be able to fight for them, because even without AI, a lot of times they're one of the most overlooked groups of people.
That is such a phenomenal point, and I actually cut a slide that I was like, it doesn't fit, but thank you for reading my mind. You know, I'm really moved by Bob Moses. Anyone familiar with Bob Moses, MacArthur Grant winner Bob Moses, who created the Algebra Project? Bob Moses came of age during the same time as Dr. King, and he worked with SNCC, and he worked in all these various spaces with Ella Baker and so many other very famous civil rights scholars and activists. And he said, oh my goodness, algebra or math is the civil rights fight of the 21st century. Math. How many of you have been avoiding it? Go back, take that math class again, take it again. There's so many ways, because you've got to close this gap. Bob Moses would actually get a MacArthur Grant Award, a MacArthur Genius Grant Award, because of his intentionality of increasing the education knowledge of algebra as a foundation that is going to help undergird individuals into our next economic era. That's some research I'm very, very fascinated on, which is the importance of teaching engineering, the importance of teaching STEM, STEAM, all of the combinations, but really an understanding of how the tech works and how math, just fundamental math works, and how critical that will be for our next economic era. So how do we get the information there? Pipelines matter. I'll say something wild. Math matters. Old school algebra matters. FOIL. How many of you still like a good FOIL? I still like a good FOIL. It just feels right. First, outside, inside, last. Oh my goodness. Ooh, I feel good just saying it, right? Cursive matters. Doing something iteratively matters. Building those neurons in your brain. Logical thought matters. That intro to philosophy, that intro to logic, introduction to reasoning, all of these kind of ideas, just getting your brain to be able to put thought to thought is going to be so very critical to prepare individuals for this next economic era, to make those gap closing. So an organization that I'm a big supporter of in Albuquerque is a group called Justice Code. My children grew up in a different version, Saturday Science and Math, led by Miss Deborah Johns. And these were a group of Black kids in Albuquerque, New Mexico, learning how to enter the Los Alamos Supercomputing Challenge and traveling the country with the National Society of Black Engineers. And they were learning how to code, not just because their parents at home understood it, but because they're with another group of people just like them from all over the country, writing code and entering competitions and building and playing on supercomputers. To end this moment, I'm going to give a mom brag. One of my kids is working on her PhD at Johns Hopkins in systems engineering. The other kid's working on her master's in astrophysics at Harvard. And my son is coding at Morgan State University, right? So these little introductions matter. They matter. How early you get them involved in it. And it's not just my kids who are at home getting it, but it also got exposed, and Ms. Johns was so intentional that it get to all kinds of kids. And the version of the program now, Justice Code, is actually paired with a group of students over in Ghana who actually wake up, fall asleep. I'm not sure what time zone they are compared to us in Albuquerque, but the kids are on coding with kids in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Ghana at the same time to enter the Los Alamos Supercomputing Challenge. Super cool, super cool. So I think access and exposure early and often is a big deal. I am so grateful to all of you for your time today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming out today. We do have more sandwiches, so our plates were a little small. So feel free to grab another plate and grab another sandwich on your way out. And for those of you, even if you didn't RSVP for the workshop, if you want to spend more time with Sonia, we'll be back here at 3:30 for her workshop on incorporating algorithmic justice into your research, regardless of your discipline. You don't need to know Java aside from it being coffee in order to come to the workshop. So it's for everybody. Please grab a sandwich on your way out. And thank you again so much for coming.